in A Sketch of the Past, let's get to exactly what it is that um, in gives us reason to be reading this. Memory, first and foremost. So memory is a big topic in our class. We've been talking about it in relation to numerous things already, and the dastardly difficult thing that we have with memory, which is that we are often remembering what is not really there, what didn't quite happen. Or, as we've also talked about, people lie. So we don't want to do the lying part for sure, but we often are unconscious of how our memories are distorting things, and so we're exploring this as a topic throughout. Memory then is central to her work. So, as is the idea that Woolf's experience reading many memoirs has led her to a chief failure of many of the ones she's read. Quote, they leave out the person to whom things happened. Page 65. She goes on to explain, the reason is that it is so difficult to describe any human being. So they say in these memoirs, this is what happened. But they do not say what the person was like to whom it happened. And the events mean very little unless we know first to whom they happened. Unquote. Even perfunctory research about memoir writing demonstrates the accuracy of Woolf's criticism. So much creative nonfiction writing gets to the external events about the person being described, such as yourself, but not the interior life of that person. Our task, it seems to me, in writing creative nonfiction is precisely to not only define and give shape to that interior life, but to render it in such a way that the reader comes to know the depths, not simply the surface meanings, of the first-person character in the drama of life. This is no easy task. What we're trying to do here is uncover some ways to do it. And Woolf tells us. So how does Woolf go about doing it and telling us about it? First, she begins not with where she was born and not who her parents were. These are decidedly ineffective ways to begin creative nonfiction. She begins with her first memory. She states that she was, quote, sitting either in a train or in an omnibus, thus heightening the choice she makes to be transparent to the reader. If she doesn't know something, she will tell us she doesn't know this thing. So she doesn't fake it. She doesn't say, I was sitting in an omnibus. She says, I was sitting either in a train or in an omnibus. I can't quite remember. She's coming clean. She's being truthful with us. That goes a long way in creating what we will soon discover as a truth speaker from Vivian Gornick. And that phrase, truth speaker, which we will read soon from Vivian Gornick's The Situation and the Story, is found on pages 25, 26, and page 165 of Gornick's work. So here, though, we have an example of it. She's being a truth speaker, or, as Gornick also says, a truth-speaking persona. She, Woolf, tells us about her first memory being of the colors of her mother's dress as she sat in her lap. Then she does something else we can all learn from in terms of establishing a truth speaker. She says, or she indicates that she alters the time frame of a memory, of her memory, in order to suit her artistic endeavor. Quote, perhaps we were going to St. Ives, she writes. More probably, for from the light it must have been evening, we were coming back to London. But it is more convenient artistically to suppose that we were going to St. Ives, for that will lead to my other memory, right? And the other memory is of her as an infant in the room of St. Ives, this island little town where she spends with her family summers, and of the wind blowing the blinds, of the acorn of the blinds, scratching the floor, moving on the floor, and of the sound of the waves, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And this is her other memory. So notice, she, as an artist, wants the second memory to be closely aligned with the first. And so she chooses to say to the reader, look, we may have been going to St. Ives, but it was more probable that we were coming to London. We were coming back from St. Ives to London instead. But it's more convenient for me as a writer, as an artist, as an aesthetic person, to show you this first memory of my mother in my mother's lap first, and then to show you how that is associated with my infant memory in my room at St. Ives. So notice she's not doing any of this without telling you, the reader, what is going on. So as a reader reading as a writer, I'm aware that I have all of these choices to make as a writer. And Woolf is showing me all of this. So we have one memory leading into another. And in Woolf's case, she wants to lead them seamlessly into each other for dramatic effect. At some point, likely every time we sit and write, we are confronted with a sobering fact. My life hasn't been shapely in the way that creative nonfiction needs it to be shapely. Then we have to make a choice. Do I stay with the facts, going to London, or do I alter the pattern for the sake of artistic integrity, going to St. Ives? What Woolf does is change the fact and tell the reader about it. Mary Karr, author of Lit, Cherry, and Liars Club, says in a book she wrote about writing creative nonfiction that probably is a very important word in the creative nonfiction writer's vocabulary. It demonstrates that we don't know for certain what happened, which is the case with most of our lives. And few of us probably don't remember a very early memory with much accuracy at all. But here we have Woolf using that word, probably, in a very useful way. More probably, we were coming back to London. That probably lets the reader know that Woolf herself doesn't know the fact that she is being honest in telling the reader. This builds trust. We can't possibly expect the reader to understand us, let alone become devoted to us, if we aren't trustworthy. So, after these two early memories, Woolf notes the aforementioned flaw with most creative nonfiction. They leave out the person to whom things happened. And then she gives us the next memory, which is going down to the beach. I stopped, quote, I stopped at the top to look at the gardens. They were sunk beneath the road. The apples were on a level with one's head. The gardens gave off a murmur of bees. The apples were red and gold. There were also pink flowers and gray and silver leaves. The buzz, the croon, the smell, all seemed to press voluptuously against some membrane, not to burst it, but to hum round one such a complete rapture of pleasure that I stopped, smelt, looked. But again, I cannot describe that rapture. It was rapture rather than ecstasy. What a full and complete, it's almost a narrative right there she's giving us. It's incredible, but this leads to the shock which is the next important idea in Woolf's A Sketch of the Past, and one that matters to us greatly in this class in relation to transitional moments. The shock of the memory associated with the hall mirror. So this memory, first of the shame she feels seeing her own image in the mirror, then asking herself what could possibly cause that shame, is traumatic and psychologically astute. In brief, she was molested by her half-brother, George Duckworth, when she was, quote, 6 or 7 perhaps. Notice again the mitigating word perhaps there, which is akin to probably, which reinforces her personal voice or her persona as a truth speaker. He was exploring her private parts, she writes. That's a quote, that's not my words, which dispels this notion of Woolf as a snob or Woolf as a fastidious person who never discusses realities of life. That's just not the case. Virginia Woolf is one of the most forward-looking writers of all time. So the idea of shock, and there is the first shock of this moment with George Duckworth, but then there are 3 other shocks that come in quick succession. One, she's fighting with her brother Toby, a fist fight on the lawn, and she goes to swing at him, and she suddenly realizes, why would I ever want to hurt another human being? Which is my paraphrase of what she says. And the second is that she's looking in the garden at a plant, a flower, and she notices that it's whole, that it's connected with itself and all of its parts, but it's also connected with the earth. And she has an epiphany, which is another word for a shock, perhaps. And the epiphany is that things are connected. And the third shock, she tells us, is an acquaintance of their family committed suicide. All 3 of these are related with the word shock and are related with the word being. So moments of being is the text. Being and non-being is a central idea of this text. And the shock, or the exceptional moment, leads to one of Woolf's most important pieces of writing in all her oeuvre, being and non-being. Woolf associates transitional or exceptional experience with what she calls being, living life consciously, as opposed to non-being, living life unconsciously. On page 70, she distinguishes between the moments of being and moments of non-being. Quote, every day includes much more non-being than being. Yesterday, she writes, for example, Tuesday the 18th of April, was, as it happened, a good day, above average in being. It was fine. I enjoyed writing these first pages. My head was relieved of the pressure of writing about Roger Fry, a biography she was writing. I walked over Mount Misery and along the river, and save that the tide was out, the country, which I notice very closely always, was colored and shaded as I like. There were the willows, I remember, all plumy and soft green and purple against the blue. I also read Chaucer with pleasure and began a book, the memoirs of Madame de Lafayette, which interested me. Unquote. Here then is what being means at this moment to Virginia Woolf. The engagement with life. She reads with pleasure and she revels in the rhythms and colors of nature. She's fully alive. There's a sense of being as living without separation between individual consciousness and the world in which that consciousness takes place. There's no struggle, no complaint, no hurry, no ambition, it seems either, though Woolf was a highly ambitious person, producing 9 form-shattering novels, 3 books of nonfiction, many volumes of letters and diaries of biography, more than 100 essays. Her works take up an entire shelf in my library. So she's fully invested in living, in being, which is ironic in somebody who commits suicide, but there you have it. Non-being, however, is when one is living unconsciously, or as I like to think of it, being Walking Dead. So being on Netflix, binging on Netflix, a whole series for the weekend. Non-being. I'm guilty. Scrolling for hours on Facebook, not engaging with our partner, etc. Right? Or TikTok, or Instagram, or Twitter, or whatever. Non-being. These separate moments of being, quote, she continues on page 70, were, however, embedded in more moments of non-being. I have already forgotten what Leonard, Virginia Woolf's husband, and I talked about at lunch and at tea. Although it was a good day, the goodness was embedded in a kind of nondescript cotton wool. This is always so. A great part of every day is not lived consciously. One walks, eats, sees things, deals with what has to be done, the broken vacuum cleaner, ordering dinner, writing orders to Mabel, washing, cooking dinner, bookbinding, almost the whole day of non-being. Unquote. When we drift out of consciousness, out of conscious living, and into the menial tasks that probably affect us more than we know, or when physical pain keeps us locked up within the physical being of our bodies such that our spirits feel trapped or silenced, when we don't connect with others or the world around us, we're in a state of non-being. We don't listen to the conversations we're having. In short, we're there and not there. Sound familiar? Non-being can, I think, be likened to just the facts, or as Charles Fernyhough calls it, semantic memory. Just the facts. Today is September 9th, it's 11:34, etc. Being, though, can be viewed as akin to autobiographical meaning. When I'm giving in my writing autobiographical details that allow the reader to enter the scene, hear what's in the scene, feel what's in the scene, smell the bees, smell the flowers, hear the buzz, or the hum, and sense the, quote, complete rapture of pleasure that I stopped, smelt, looked, as Virginia Woolf would have it. This joy that she's talking about. So this is why autobiographical memory is so crucial. And Woolf is a great example of a writer who uses this to great effect. It's never too much. It's just the exact right amount to ask the reader to partake of the scene. So perhaps we can engage with that in our own writing, in honesty, in a lack of fear. So I wanted to give you this little bit of introduction so that we can all be on the same page, more or less, and so we could continue our conversation in Canvas about the great Virginia Woolf and about how she is using certain techniques throughout the writing of A Sketch of the Past in such a way that allows us to practice them in our own writing.